What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some of the recent Bloodlines 2 news about its new developer, the Chinese Room, alongside its new release window of fall 2024. Originally, I wasn't planning on covering this, because the information I just told you pretty much was the announcement. However, for some reason, in a few subsequent interviews after the fact, they released a lot more interesting information that I personally would have preferred they included in the announcements, but nonetheless, all those things combined to make something a little more substantial to cover. Though, right here at the beginning of this video, I do want to mention, just because I know many people will comment on it, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about this game and kind of just wait to see how everything plays out. As we are about to get into, it had an incredibly rough development cycle, pretty much the worst I've ever seen, before finally landing on this upcoming release window. And while I'm fairly certain my regular viewers know all about this, for the sake of people who might have just clicked on this video, to give a quick recap, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is a sequel to a 2004 cult classic that was originally supposed to be out years ago, like 2020, before being delayed, and ultimately the original developers on it being fired, including some of the people who worked on the original, which naturally rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But in 2021, when the original developers were completely pulled off the project, it was rather silently handed off to a second studio that was kept secret for a very long time, which we now know is the Chinese Room. More on that studio in a bit. This has been a couple years back now, so honestly a lot of people assumed it was cancelled. However, they have given several interviews here and there, that is to say Paradox Interactive, the people publishing this. So while many people expected a cancellation, the fact that it was continuing to be worked on was fairly well known. We just didn't know who was working on it. So now let's talk a little bit about the more interesting things. First of all, how much of this project remains the original vision and how much was redone. And it seems to be a substantial mix. Early on, when development first shifted to the new team, it was stated that they were being handed all of the currently completed work, which given how close it was to being released is assumed to be fairly substantial. So how much of that is actually getting reused? It would seem a decent amount, but far from all of it. From an interview that they did after this announcement with PC Gamer, which will be linked down below by the way, the new creative director, Alex Skidmore, explained that they kept a substantial amount of things like the art and level design. This is why we actually see a repeated character or things like that in the new trailers, and they also kept the location in Seattle. However, they also changed a lot of things. It was described as using an entirely new codebase alongside different mechanics and RPG systems. And while that's all well and good, what does any of that actually mean? Well, for starters, the story we're looking at here is clearly a little different, as the original pitch for this game had us playing as a thin blood who was turned in a recent mass vampire attack, so to speak. However, in this new updated version of the game, it is confirmed that we're going to be playing as an elder, that is to say a vampire more than 300 years old, who has recently awoken from torpor, which is like a very long extended vampire nap that allows them to pass through the ages. They went on to say that your character is going to be a mix of an established character and who you are on top of that, so presumably things like clans, etc. will be something you can paint on to this otherwise more established character in the vampire world. To move on to the more subjective part of this, which is to say opinions. World of Darkness, and more specifically Vampire the Masquerade, in my opinion, has always struggled with adapting its rules and systems to a game, specifically the age of the vampires. Because in Vampire the Masquerade, the older a vampire is, typically the stronger it becomes. This is because over the many generations of vampires that exist, the blood has started to weaken, resulting in what are now known as thin bloods, which, to put it simply, are barely vampires. And the problem with a vampire game is that typically you start as a vampire who is just freshly turned. But reconciling that with the lore of Vampire the Masquerade, where that makes you incredibly weak, can be a bit of a problem where you want to actually be a vampire. There are a few different systems around this, but again, adapting them to a video game has always been a bit weird. So because of that, I do enjoy the prospect of playing as an older 300-plus-year-old vampire, but it really just depends on how it's handled, because even that runs into its own problems. Vampires after a certain age in this world, if you will, are essentially demigods. and reconciling those power levels with a game that actually still manages to pose some sort of challenge can be an issue. And that's to say nothing of the RPG systems, which we'll get to in a second. I do think it's very possible to create this elder character, still let you put your own sort of spin and personality on it, your clan, etc., which can all change and provide a decent role-playing experience. It really just depends on how it gets handled, but the potential is there. The other thing, though, is the role-playing, which goes a little bit hand in hand with what I want to talk about in relation to the studio. But first, Bloodlines 1 is known for being a really great RPG that provides a ton of options and approaches to different situations that really let you kind of build your own character. And I think managing to pull off that part of it is going to be the toughest job this team has ahead of them, on top of including things like more combat-oriented mechanics that we see in the trailer. And given that this is a sequel to a cult classic, whether or not they can pull off an RPG with a big branching narrative, a strong emphasis on creating your own vampire and feeling like you have influence over the world in a way that is rewarding, etc., is already a pretty tall order to fill. So let's talk a little bit about the Chinese Room and their potential experience with this. The Chinese Room, despite its name, is actually a UK-based studio, and what they're known for is a list of games that tend to be described as walking simulators, things like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, or Dear Esther, though they do have a little bit of experience with slightly more horror-oriented games. And while the studio is quite well known for its incredibly atmospheric games, what they're not known for is RPGs. In a bit of good news on that front, the new creative director that I referenced earlier, Alex Skidmore, does have some experience in that front, as he used to work on the Fable series as part of Lionhead Studios, and he was involved in the more recent Gears Tactics game, which is a tactical RPG that was well received. So their creative director does have some experience with RPGs, and presumably they would have hired some other people who did as well. But the studio as a whole isn't really known for that. So while I certainly hope they can pull this off, as I very much so would love a fantastic Bloodlines 2, as I'm a huge fan of the first one myself, there is reason to approach this with a certain degree of caution. To sort of flip that around and play devil's advocate, the Chinese Room is known for its very atmospheric games. And because of that, while I have questions about their ability to pull off the RPG side of it, what I do think that they will almost certainly nail, especially since they kept a lot of the art and direction and location, etc. from the original build, is likely the world and atmosphere that they're shooting for. Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness at large is a very moody setting. And just judging by their previous body of work, I think that part of it, this team will probably nail. But to put all of that information together and sort of wrap this video up, I think it is a little difficult for anyone at this point to get excited about this game, which might change as we get a little closer to release. Even myself, who have many times in the past expressed my own love for both the setting, the original game, and everything else there, it's a little hard due to the situation to really get too caught up in this until we really see some more proof and actually see everything in motion. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because I am hopeful it turns out to be a great game, as I am with all games. All in all, with all this new information, it looks like things are finally headed in the right direction, provided there are no further delays, etc. However, fundamentally, nothing has changed exactly. The release date is still a ways off, there's still plenty of reasons to be skeptical about it, but I still hope it's good. That pretty much does it for this video though. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to stick around, subscribe, leave a like and a comment while you're at it. When this game gets any more updates, I will almost certainly cover it, as the development of this title has certainly been bizarre. But regardless of how the project turns out, I know for a fact I am certainly excited to review it and see how all this pans out and finally wraps up. But that's it for me. So regardless of all that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.